All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Mondays Down South. It is your long-awaited host who has missed probably the last three podcasts at this point and counting, but Evan and Cy have been holding down the fort. And we actually have a special guest. His name is Connor Miller from Charlotte, North Carolina. He's been one of my first friends when I moved down to Charlotte. And we were laughing like a couple weeks ago. I was like, I can't believe I haven't gotten you on the podcast yet. He's really good friends with Joe and Shiv, and those guys have been on. And he's like, dude, I've got my takes ready. Like, let's do this thing. So I'm glad we were able to make it work. And there is there's an extra dose of especial in the fact that he will be attending the wedding as well. So all four of us will be together in literally less than 2 weeks. It's crazy. Just like saying that and letting that register. It's awesome. Super excited for that. So we'll all see each other in the great state of Florida. But I'll kick it over Connor's way. Connor, like, tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been in Charlotte, and then obviously who your sports teams are before we jump into NFL draft stuff today.
Yeah, so I've been in Charlotte for about as long as I've been alive. So a long, long time. Was born in Atlanta, moved here when I was like 2 or 3 years old. Not a fan of any Atlanta sports teams other than the Braves. So don't like the Falcons. Don't like the Hawks. Don't really care too much about the Hawks in general. But my teams. I went to NC State. Go Pack. Big Wolfpack fan. Obviously basketball, football, baseball, but mostly basketball and football. And then as far as professional teams, we've got all the juggernauts down here in Charlotte with the Panthers, the Hornets, and the Charlotte Knights, if anyone has heard of them before. The best team that I root for is probably Carolina Hurricanes in Raleigh. So they just won a playoff game last night. So definitely the best chance at a championship out of any of the teams I root for, I would say by far. So yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at right now.
Yeah,
I love it. Go
some,
Canes.
Yep, go Canes for you guys. But I'm glad you said you're in Atlanta. When you said you weren't an Atlanta fan of sports, I was so happy because I was like, he's not going to say Braves, and then you said Braves. So then, But I'm glad you're not as big of a baseball fan because I'm a Mets fan. So if you were a deep cut Braves fan, then we'd have some beef. But it's okay.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. We beat you guys pretty much every year, but it's okay.
Except for last year when we beat you to make the playoffs and went further. Just a little bit on the nose.
This could get chippy real quick.
Hey man, if there's one thing we want to make clear here, if we bring the guests on, they're full on debating with us. So I like that we're off to a hot start. No, but all jokes aside, welcome aboard, Connor. We're happy to have a new guest on, and especially one that we're going to get to have some drinks with and celebrate Zach with in a few weeks, and Alexa, of course. So does anyone want to tee it up? I feel like Zach had a good prompt for this. I think it'd be a good idea. Ev, do you have any comments before we jump into it?
No, Zach, is this going to be your last podcast? As a non-married man, I guess it might be. What's that about,
dude? This is the last podcast as a non-married guy, man. That's hard to believe, dude. But hey, we're not hanging up the gloves. We're just gonna double down once we get married. All right, I'm coming in with all the hot takes so nothing's really changing. All right, let me just make that clear. Probably my availability will be better, but to tee up the prompt. So obviously the NFL draft is this Thursday, and admittedly I hadn't done too much research until shout out Michael Dolan, one of our buddies, who is a sports beat writer. He came out with a amazing NFL draft or a mock draft for the first round, and then that just spiraled all the interest back in. It kind of like tailored off from the ends of NCAA March Madness, and now I'm right back into it. But from my initial research, I am not very impressed with this class, I have to say. I don't think the offensive tackles are extraordinary. I don't think the quarterbacks are extraordinary. And I think the storyline is we need to make them extraordinary because it's like these big personality names like Cam Ward and Shadir Sanders and so on. But ultimately, the prompt is to identify a couple of underrated guys that you think, based on where they're supposed to go in the draft, like who could make impact, and then also some overrated guys, and then also for each of our respective teams, who you think we're going to draft or who do you want to draft. So that's just kind of the angle of how I wanted to go about this. But yes, I have anything from you guys before we kick this off?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm good to go. It just depends on which one you want to start with. You guys want to go with underrated or overrated first?
Let's go underrated, and I'm gonna kick it over Miller's way. I
Like
want
that.
him to give his first underrated player, and then we'll all just go around the carousel and just keep going.
But my one is for quarterback would be Kyle McCord. So, obviously put out Ohio State last year, then came to Syracuse, threw for 3,200 yards, 24 touchdowns, second best in the Big Ten, 66% completion percentage, which was seventh best in school history at Ohio State with a 12-1 record, and they just told him to kick rocks after that. So he and all he does is go on to break Deshaun Watson's ACC passing record. Led Syracuse to a 10-win season, counting the bowl game. Led the nation in passing yards. So he attacks defenses, can make all the throws, read coverages. He's won everywhere he's been, including in high school, and he won a couple of state championships there. But he's someone that I feel like as a quarterback, like you said, Zach, I don't think this is a very good class quarterback-wise at all. The only one I would feel confident in being a starter from day one, would be Cam Ward, obviously. But underrated-wise, I think Kyle McCord is a bit underrated, and someone that I would, if I was a team that really needed a quarterback somewhere in the third round, I think he'd be worth taking a shot on over some of these other guys that have below average production. Maybe they have below average arm talent, etc. I think he has a good combination of everything. And again, he has a chip on his shoulder from his days at Ohio State. So I think he's a bit of a sleeper.
So can I put you on the spot and have you rank him against the other quarterbacks? Then how high would you have him? I think what's ESPN got him like 8-ish.
Yeah. So
QB9?
I think I'd probably have him fourth behind Ward, Sanders, and Dart. After that, I think McCord would be fourth.
I like that too because you went deep with it. I feel like people aren't talking about McCord as much, and I like that you went deep because that's someone like someone you could potentially get fourth, fifth round, even if he drops, and if he is a viable starter, then that's a steal, right? So I like that a lot.
All right, jumping in with one of my underrated guys, I'm going to go a little bit biased here and to call him underrated with where he could potentially go in this draft, but Mike Green, the edge out of Marshall. I'm a Sunbelt guy, but I think he's one of the top edges in the class, a little undersized. Obviously, there's questions about the competition he played against, but I think he's going to be an impact player for sure. And I'm hoping the Commanders take a look at him if he falls there to the back end of the first round, but I'm going to go biased, go with my fellow kind of conferenceman here after watching him play this year, and the dude is just an animal, so I think he's going to be a stud despite some of the competition he faced at the collegiate level.
Because he played against high school recruits.
Hey, man, don't knock him. Don't knock him. He's going to be big time.
He played against the Little Giants. That's what he played against, dude. He's Spike from the Little Giants. That's literally what you're admitting right now. This guy hasn't seen top tier competition.
Yeah, but that's the issue though, Zach. I think a lot of NFL GMs probably fall into that loop and then end up sleeping on these guys. And then every year you get at least one or two guys that come from Sunbelt or another conference similar, and then they take over. I saw it with Darius Leonard years ago with the Colts, and we've seen many since then. It's hard to evaluate when they're playing lower level competition, but I mean, Josh Allen played at Wyoming, guys, and he's the second best player in the NFL right now. So I like that take, Evan. I like it. I'll jump in. I'm going to be extremely biased as well. We got a couple Gamecocks on this draft, and I was debating between which ones to go to because one thing that people, I think, everyone was hyping about, Lenoria Sellers last year in terms of our team's performance. But one thing that I don't think people talked about enough was how good our was compared to prior years. and that was on the back of multiple great defensive players. I was debating between Ewan Mora, which is our safety, who I think will be one of the best safeties we see in the draft in years, but he's still projected like in the top 20, top 30. So it's not as deep of a sleeper. So I'm going to jump to Kyle Kennard. He's a bit older, but he's a pass rusher, and he's in the hundreds. And he was across from Dylan Stewart last year at South Carolina. He played some NFL level talent. He dominated week after week. He was arguably just as good as Stewart in terms of his pass rush capabilities. I think the reason he's projected a little bit lower is because he's a bit older. He was I believe, a fifth-year senior because he came over from as a transfer and then dominated last year. He's someone I'd look out for as an edge prospect that you can get in the hundreds right now, potentially in the third, fourth round. And I think he's got the ability to come in day one and be a pass rusher because he's a veteran already in terms of the number of snaps that he's played. He's going to come in with a lot of experience. I would be paying attention to him. He's quick. He's strong. He's got basically what you would want out of an edge rusher. So I think he's a nice deep prospect for someone to draft.
Okay, I like that. I like that. Keeping things moving, rolling along. So I mentioned high school recruits. So, this one guy, he reminds me of a high school athlete in Tim Riggins from Friday Night Lights. Give me Tyler Warren, the kid from Penn State, 44. I feel like I'm going to be dead, like just terribly wrong on this point. Like give it 2 or 3 years. But why do I feel like this guy's going to be the next Dallas Clark? That's his player profile, and I think I can actually ironically see him land with the Indianapolis Colts, who are going to need to replace Mo Alley Cox at a specific point. I think that this guy is the best blocking tight end in the league, and I'm not necessarily thrilled with the with like the pass catching and the receiving tight ends that are in this draft. One of them is Colston Loveland, right? Who he's actually on my overrated list. With Dalton Kincaid and those type of guys having a down year last year in the NFL, I wonder if you got to go back to the building blocks of like those like grunt force tight ends that are not afraid to block, and they also can have the pass catching abilities too. So give me this Tyler Warren kid out of Penn State. I think he's going to be a stud, and I can actually see him going to size Colts.
I absolutely love Tyler Warren, and I think I will cry tears of joy if the Colts draft him. My only thing I'll challenge you on is I don't think he's underrated at all. I believe that most people project him as a top 10 pick, if not higher, because he's legitimately that good. So, if anything, you saying he's underrated makes me think that you're saying he should go even higher than 8 or 9. I'm guessing is what you're saying then.
Tim Riggins should get draft first overall, man. Yeah, so he's that's a wild take. Yeah, I think he could. He's not like a top 5 guy, but I was seeing him like going 16, 17. I think his draft stock's maybe like 10 or 11. So you're essentially saying you don't think he's going to fall to the Colts?
Oh no, I think he's going 8 or 9 at the latest. I mean,
people, wow,
especially look at what Brock Bowers did last year, and he did that with bad quarterback play. Tyler Warren is known to be an amazing blocking tight end, but also someone who is impossible to. He's got that like Gronk profile in the context of the middle of the field, where if you throw the ball, and Dallas Clark was a great comparison. If you throw the ball to him, it's not even necessarily that he's going to separate much. It's that if you're a corner or a linebacker or a safety, you can't get around his body. So he'll catch the ball in your face and you can't do anything about it. He's got that kind of building block. So he's just a complete tight end. And after what we saw, like if you could go back to last year's draft, Brock Bowers would have been like a top 5 pick, given how amazing he was, right? So I think people are going to get excited about that, and he's going to go even higher than we expect, is what I think. I'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about the Colts draft, but I think if we want him, we're going to have to trade up. I'll put it that way.
All right. I say we keep this carousel going. We'll kick it back over to Connor, and we'll go one more underrated player around the table here.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll give you a combination. I'll give you kind of a 2-in-1 as far as receivers go, just because they're semi-similar as far as where they're projected to be drafted, and actually they're both Mountain West receivers. But Kyle Williams and Torrey Horton, so both looked at probably 3rd to 4th or even later for Horton as far as where they're projected to go. But I think both have a lot of upside. Both are electric on the field. If you want to watch some good film, go watch Kyle Williams. Torrey Horton as well. Horton got hurt last year, but before that he had consecutive 1,100-yard, 8-touchdown seasons, and he has a 9.83 relative athletic score. So he's one of the best, or one of the most athletic receivers in the draft, and also is a really polished route runner as well. So think a lot of him. I know a lot of people have Kyle Williams as an underrated guy too. He had 1,400 yards or 14 touchdowns, 1,200 yards last season. Super explosive breakaway speed, and he was Mountain West Freshman of the Year in his freshman season. So he popped early and then had a great year this past year. So I just think that those are two receivers that are a bit under the radar that could go in the kind of 3 to 5 round range and end up being maybe solid number 2 receivers in the league.
Love it.
I like
those
that
are good ones. I got a receiver too. He's much higher on the board, so less of that deeper sleeper. But I like Jaden Higgins a lot. If you need that big body, just size receiver, that he tested really well from a 40 standpoint on his either pro day or the combine. I guess he doesn't have like in-game speed quite the same as you might get from his 40 time, but like kind of that T Higgins body. His 40 time was similar to AJ Brown, but again, it might not show up the same in game speed. But I like him to challenge to be one of the best receivers in this class, just for a team that needs a bigger body guy that has enough athleticism to get it done when you pair it with elite route running ability he has.
I like that one a lot, Evan. Especially because I'll talk about a little bit more of this potentially in our overrated, but I think receivers this year are not as heavy in terms of like the top end talent, but it's a deep class, meaning you get a lot of guys that are like good players like later on, and I think that was a really good pool for that. I'm going to jump over to a position that probably gets talked about the least out of all of them, at least outside of special teams. And I'm going to go with an offensive guard. I'm going with Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State. He's currently projected to go middle to late second round, and I think obviously it's because guards aren't valued as much. But as someone as a Colts fan, guys like Quentin Nelson and such who can transform a team with interior play, with run game, and of course coming out of Ohio State, who just won the national championship, and obviously we saw how dominant they were, and a big part of that was their blocking. I think he's being underrated just because he's a guard, right? Like I think if you're truly a great guard who can block at the line and then block at the second level as well, which I think he's capable of, where he can get to the linebackers. That's a game changer in the running game. So like for a team like the Bears or someone like that who wants to employ that kind of game plan, I think he'll be a steal in the second round. So I'm gonna go with Donovan Jackson.
Love the appreciation for the trenches there, Cy, as I typically go to the skill position players immediately. So that shows my allegiance and fandom over the last year or so.
See, Zach, I actually think you're very good about going. You like to go defense, man. I always appreciate that about you. But
Zach, you sound like the Falcons always going for the skill position players, huh?
Oh, you guys are gonna love this. I'm teeing myself up perfectly because I've got a defensive-minded guy. And according to Mick Dolan's draft, he is going to the Falcons. This guy's name is Jahad Campbell, inside linebacker for Alabama. I have been obsessed with this dude, and I really hope that Terry Fontenot, our GM, doesn't just wakes up and makes good, somewhat secure decisions for this football team, as opposed to going for I would not be surprised at this point if he just drafts a fullback in the first round, because this dude just bounces around offensive positional players for first round draft picks, and our defense stays bad year over year. So I think that Jahad Campbell would be a stud. He's an inside linebacker, but he's side to side. He's a playmaker, plays on the sidelines. He's so fast. He's insanely what's the word for it? He commits big time to stopping the run. So I do fear that he'll get a little out of position in the NFL. There will definitely be some growing pains with drafting this player, but he's a stud. He can tackle, but he's also kind of got that Deion Jones build to where he can go sideline with great quickness. So I like this guy a lot, and if the Falcons drafted him, I think it would plug an immediate hole in our defense. As we've kind of explored the free agency to patch our safety and our secondary help, Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons and all those guys. But we get a good inside linebacker like this, I think it's gonna be great. And he comes from Bama, so he's already got that stamp of certification. But yeah, what do you guys think about that pick?
I think anytime you take a linebacker, specifically an inside linebacker out of Alabama, with the way, I know it's not the Saban era anymore, but it's hard for me to ever question that pick, especially because that's another position that, especially in the last however many years, inside linebacker has not been getting drafted very high, at least as a standard, right? Like growing up, we had such an emphasis on that position from a defensive standpoint in the Ray Lewis era and such. And I feel like as we get older, people just want more skill position pass rushers, like shut down corner types. I like that you prioritize someone, and the fact that he's being mocked where he is as an inside linebacker goes to show how talented he is. So I think that'd be a great pick for y'all. I agree.
Yeah, and to your point, as far as being able to go sideline to sideline, there's so many quick slot receivers, tight ends that can move out in space, where those linebackers really need to be able to move in order to stay with them and limit some of those big plays. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And like you said, we know the Falcons need help in that area too. So I think that's a good pick.
Yeah, the only thing I didn't like with was his player comp, which was Reuben Foster, who was another inside linebacker at Bama. So let's hope that Campbell keeps his violence on the field.
Can we just really quickly address? Can we just really quickly address player comps though? It's the dumbest thing ever, man. Like player comps, like people just pull things out of thin air and are like, "Oh, this guy's gonna be that guy," and it never plays out that way. It's the funniest thing, but yet, no matter how dumb it is, I love looking at player comps because
I love player
like the
comps.
Colts, yeah, like the Colts would draft someone and be like, "This guy's gonna be the next like." This guy's gonna be the next Dwight Freeney, and I'm like, let's go, and it never works out that way. But I just love when people say it. It's hilarious.
What I don't understand is why people always have to make a player comp to a player that played for that specific team before. People do it all the time. It's like, oh yeah, well, just because this guy played for our team, he's got to be comped to this guy, or there's 31 other teams in the NFL. You can comp him to somebody else.
But I have a quick note for overrated. I think we should address. If you have more than one, let's say upwards of two, maybe three. I say we address all our overrated at the same time, and then let us comment because just for the sake of time, so we can jump into our team profile too. Because I get the feeling we're all going to have pretty strong thoughts on that. So just a quick note. Yep.
Sure.
All right, I'll throw mine out. Luther Burden III, which I know Sai is going to be super ticked off on because his player comp is Debo Samuel, who's a South Carolinian. But Luther Burden, like, it could work if he's in like a particular scheme, but like people have caught up to the Debo Samuels of the world in the NFL from a schematic standpoint. Luther Burden is nothing special to me when you look at what Debo was able to do as a 3-star recruit at South Carolina. Like, Luther Burden is like, he's got the moves and he's got the same body type and he's an incredible college player. I just don't think any of that's realistically going to transition to the NFL. So he would be labeled Kadarius Toney Jr. essentially. I would warn teams to stay far away from Luther Burden III.
I will say this: I have no problem with you saying that you think he might be a bust because people are comparing him to Debo and you don't expect that. What I do disagree with, though, is you saying that NFL teams know how to handle a player like Debo schematically. It's not because they know how to handle him schematically that he didn't do well last year. It's because he just either regressed with age or he was hurt and didn't play very well last year. Debo in his prime a couple years ago, there is no damn team in the NFL that's stopping him. And he's proven that on the ground. He's proven that in the air. He's proven that in every capacity of the field. Every team could use a guy like Debo in his prime. And I think that's the part I disagree with because he is so unique. And that's why I agree with your take that he might be overrated if he's getting compared to Debo because Debo was like a one of one. There's not many guys in the NFL that are as versatile as he is. And I've always made that point.
It's funny that you listed him there because I was about to list him as my honorable mention underrated player. I think he'd probably be my wide receiver too in this draft. I had a Golden below Tet. So, but I mean, as far as his college production goes, I mean, you compared him to Debo, but Debo had 8 carries and 2 carries in his last 2 college seasons. So it wasn't like he was playing like Debo, the NFL Debo in college. So I think that's a tough comparison, but also Luther Burden's best college season was miles better than Debo's best college season as far as the receiver goes. And I'm not saying he's going to be so much better than Debo in the NFL necessarily, but I see him more in the DJ Moore kind of mold, and I think he's probably more polished than DJ was coming out of college as well. I mean, obviously DJ was 25th pick or something like that for the Panthers, but I think Burden's going to be a really good NFL player. I mean, like you said, he's got the athleticism. He's shown it at the SEC level, and I think that he's a little bit underrated in my opinion.
I'll say this for context, just quickly on that note, is I would agree that obviously, like numbers wise, he had a better season than Debo's had in college comparatively. But for context, Connor, I went to University of South Carolina, so and I was there when Debo was there. And the thing that Debo was stuck with was an actually terrible team, like absolutely awful offense. And he basically put the team on his back in any game we won with bad quarterback play, bad running back play, and bad offensive line play, which is why when he was in college, even as a 3-star recruit, I said, guys, watch out for Debo in the draft, not just because I'm a Gamecock fan, but because I watched him play against elite. Like this is when Georgia and Alabama and all of them were elite. I watched him go out there and actually burn those teams unlike other players. So that's why he was just in a really shitty situation. Excuse my language, but
No, I'm not trying to say that Debo is not a stud and he wasn't, because I was there at the game at Bank of America when he took down the opening kickoff for a touchdown against NC State. He destroyed us. So I know how good Debo was, just looking at numbers wise, obviously. But I guess it was more to the point of I just think that Burden is a really good player
totally fair.
than Debo wasn't a good player.
Totally fair.
I think he's arguably the most interesting player in this draft in terms of like where he's going to go and how teams are viewing him, because kind of to Sai's point, like that's the Luther Burden issue, right? Is his senior season was marred by a terrible team, and just like I don't think you can discount how awful the quarterback play was at Missouri last year. All right, my most overrated guy in the class. I've been hard on this one basically all year now. I think his draft stock has fallen a little bit from where it once was, so which maybe ages this take a little bit. But Jalen Milroe, there is no chance. I will die on this hill 100 times out of 100. There is zero chance that he is an NFL starter. Like, he'll get a shot at some point, sure, but this dude is a disaster. I've never seen anyone so like at such a big school that just cannot read defenses to save his life, is the dumbest decision maker I've ever seen. Like after all these Alabama games this year, I could not be less on the Jalen Milroe bandwagon. I think there's just no shot for him in the NFL.
What's crazy is, they invited him to the green room or whatever they call it.
No.
Yeah, so he's going, which everyone's kind of debating. Does that mean there's a chance that he goes in the first round? Which I agree, I think would be insane. But I don't know. They invited him to the draft.
That's terrible.
He's one of those guys. He's one of those guys that like there's gonna be at least one NFL like coach or offensive coordinator who's like a really good like quarterback guy, and they're gonna be like, oh, this is my passion project, because if I can take a guy with his level of baseline talent, obviously he's got the arm talent, he's got the ability to run and everything, and I can make him good or like at least like average in terms of decision making, then I will be like revered amongst my peers and such. That's why he's gonna go higher than he probably should. That's exactly what's gonna happen, in my opinion. But I agree with you, Evan, that like that I wouldn't be taking him in the first round either. But at this point, given where he's going, like it's a total project, so I'm sure someone's going to take that shot. Yeah. I think I'm next, right? You want to jump in? Okay. I'm gonna say this with a we're talking about overrated, right? So I'm talking about overrated in terms of draft stock. I'm not talking about overrated in terms of ability to be successful in the NFL. One player that I keep seeing people projecting higher is Matthew Golden, wide receiver out of Texas. And here's what I want to say. He was a stud at Texas, fast player. He's not super tall. He's my height. He's 5'11", but he wins at release. He's really quick. I get all of those things. My issue, though, is the way I look at overrated players is based on draft talent, right? And there's some people that are projecting Matthew Golden as the second wide receiver to go in the draft, potentially in the top 15. And that's where I think I have a problem with projections, because there's teams that might be desperate for receiver play who might reach for wide receivers. And I worry that someone like Golden, who is a smaller profile player who, in other drafts, like maybe last year's and the year prior, would have maybe gone like second, third round, is now being, maybe not third, but at least mid second, late second, is now being projected potentially in the top 15 for a guy who, like I keep making references for my teams, but it's a player like Josh Downs, who's like a smaller player and quick and fast, went in the third round a few years ago, and he's objectively a great player for where he went. But if Golden goes top 15, the expectation is going to be sky high. So I worry a little bit about that, because he's obviously coming from a great program, and he's coming from a situation where he was very successful playing with Quinn Ewers and company. But I just worry that he's being projected a bit too high because of the lack of top end talent at wide receiver, even though it's a deep class. That's where I'm gonna leave that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even as of a few weeks ago, he was almost neck and neck with Ted as far as who was going to be the first receiver off the board. Which I thought was pretty crazy, and it's kind of gone a little bit more back to Ted, but I mean it's been close for a while, and I don't think that they are necessarily that close as prospects.
I agree.
Connor,
That is unreal.
Connor, give me an overrated guy on your draft book.
Yeah, overrated. So I'll give a quarterback as well, since I did one for underrated, and like Si said, this kind of, it's not that I think he's a terrible player, but based on where I've seen him going in certain drafts, I read today that some people have him going in the top 40, which I think it's crazy. But Tyler Shah, however you pronounce it, from Louisville, so he'll be 26 years old by like the third week of the NFL season. He was in college for 7 years. This past season was his seventh season in college, and partly because he had 3 consecutive seasons where he broke his collarbone, he had a shoulder injury, and then he broke his leg. But he used to back up Justin Herbert at Oregon. If that puts things in
That's
perspective.
crazy.
Yeah, as far as how long this guy's been in college and been around. But his arm talent, yeah, he can sling the ball. He has one of the best arms in the draft, no doubt about it. But yeah, under pressure, he tends to fold. He tends to make some really kind of goofy plays as he's trying to scramble and get out of the pocket. Again, doesn't do well under pressure. He does well when he's sitting back there and he has a lot of time. But as we know in the NFL, that's typically not going to be the case unless you're playing for the Eagles or someone who has a stud O-line. So just, again, I don't think that this is a very good quarterback class. He'd probably be 5th or 6th in my wide receiver rankings, but in this class, that's not something I'm touching until at least the 4th or the 5th round. And for him to be going in the 2nd round or even the top 40 on some people's boards, I think for a guy who's almost 26 years old, he was honorable mention all ACC this year, but has never really had a standout college season. I think that's pretty overrated.
You know what I think it is? I think it's because guys like, and obviously they're still a bit younger, but guys like last year's draft, obviously Jaden Daniels and company, and of course Zach's quarterback now, they're a bit older, like 24, 25, 26. And I'm not saying this is a reason he should go where he's going. I think like scouts are probably going, oh, look at all these young guys we've been drafting who haven't been, showing up in the first couple of years. So maybe if we have a good team and we can get a guy who can come in day one and already feel like he has like veteran experience or understanding, but he shouldn't be going in the top 40. I 100% agree with you. Like if you get a guy like that in the 3rd or 4th round, then you might have gotten yourself a steal. If you get him in the top of the 2nd round, think about the prospects you're giving up to get him. So I think that's a great point, Connor.
But Miller, I'll turn it over your way. Do you agree with that? Do you guys think you should trade, or do you want to stand firm and make a pick there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you said, I think is pretty accurate. But I would probably trade back if I was Panthers. I mean, it obviously depends on what the trade package is going to be. But if there's enough value there, I mean, where are the Steelers around 23 or 24?
Yeah.
Where are they drafting? Yeah. I mean, obviously that's a long way back from 8, but if you can get maybe a couple of 2nd round picks, maybe a future first, something like future first, 2nd in this draft, something like that, then I think that it would probably be worth it. Like you said, Jalen Walker has been projected to go to the Panthers pretty much the whole, since a few months ago, the whole way through the off season, the draft season, and he's definitely a polarizing prospect as far as where is he going to play? Is he going to play with his hand in the dirt? Is he going to play, more, more as a true linebacker? I think he led Georgia with 10.5 tackles for loss, tied for first with 6.5 sacks. I think he has a lot of talent for sure, and he's one of those guys who, if he pans out to his upside, he could end up being a really good pick. But there's still a lot of question marks as far as if, whether or not he will pan out to be as good of a player as some people think. Some people have him as like the 5th overall rated prospect, and some people have him as like the 32nd overall rated prospect. So I would be fine with Jalen Walker at 8. I would be fine with Ted McMillan at 8 because the Panthers, a lot of people, and even, they interviewed our GM, Dan Morgan. He was like, we think that we have everything that we need at receiver right now, but Thielen's going to retire within the next year. The other two guys, Leggett that we drafted at the end of the first round last year, Jalen Coker, who was undrafted free agent. Obviously, Coker really overperformed and Leggett underperformed. In my opinion, I don't really see Leggett as being a future number 1 receiver. I think the two of them could end up being your second and third guys. But I would be perfectly happy with getting Ted. I think he has a chance to be, an actual number 1 receiver in the NFL. There was some talk earlier today of potentially Jacksonville taking him at 5 with Liam Cohen there being with Mike Evans last year, and they have similarities as players. But yeah, so I mean, I think the players that you kind of see there are Walker, McMillan, and then Mikael Williams, true DN from Georgia. I think that's a little bit high for him.
Mm-hmm.
I think he had like 5.5 sacks last year, and the 2 seasons before he had 4.5 sacks in each of those. So obviously you're playing with a bunch of other NFL players at Georgia, so a lot of times their production's a little bit limited. But if it's between those 3 guys, I don't see. I wouldn't. None of them would prevent me from trading down if I got a really good deal from somebody. So those are the 3 guys I think they're looking at. If I had to bet, definitely would bet on Jalen Walker as far as who they're probably going to draft. But I would trade down if they could.
If you're going to go offense there, like I think Jalen Walker is actually the right pick personally. Here's my philosophy with the top 10, top 15 of a draft in a year like this one. In the NFL draft, like there's usually like every team has and I think we're all on the same page about this, maybe like 10 to 15 guys that they consider actual like first round picks that are worth taking in the top 10, top 15. And then after that, there's a huge litany of players that you think you value at the same that you can get later in the draft. My concern with trading with the Steelers is it takes you out of the elite talent. Like I think Walker has the potential to be elite. I don't think if you go to the Steelers pick, you're getting someone elite there, most likely, especially in a year where you don't have as much top end talent. So that's my point of concern. But I would understand if they give you some immense haul to trade down if there's not someone there you don't like. If you do go offensive player, though, my opinion is that I think it's too high for McMillan. The way I look at am I saying McMillan? Am I saying that right? Yeah, it's McMillan. The way I look at McMillan is that I think he's like a worse version of Drake London or a worse version of Mike Evans personally. Like I think like those are the traits you want out of him because he's like a strong guy who wins 50-50 balls, but his separation is not very good. And that's my concern with them. I'm not saying he won't be good. I just don't think he's like a top 10, like close to top 5 pick at wide receiver. If you're going to go offense, you should go Warren. You should 100% take Warren. You can get a potentially like elite tight end who could be great for the next decade plus if you're going to go offense. That's my opinion. I don't know what you guys think of that, but I'm just going to throw that out there.
Oh,
Well,
they got
actually,
Ian Thomas, man. Ian Thomas, one of the best tight ends in the game.
Yeah, he's gone. Thank God. After we pay him like 3 years, he should have been working at Arby's for the last like 6 years. But I mean, no, I agree with you on Tyler Warren. I think he'd be worth the 8th overall pick as well. I'd rather have him definitely than Mikael Williams. But I don't know. I like Ted. I do. I think that he does compare, like you said, maybe a slightly worse version to an Evans or a Drake London. And if that's the case, I still think it's not a bad pick. But like you said, Tyler Warren, I would be fine with an 8. That gives you a weapon that's more of a sure thing, in my opinion, and that can kind of help the offense in more ways. So I do like that pick. But also to your point, how many elite guys are there in this draft? I don't think there's more than like 10 to 12. So if you're going to trade down, then, I don't think there's that much of a difference between going to like 15 or 16 than like 23 or 24, because I just don't see, there being that many, like you said, I think that there's probably a drop off after the first 10 to 14 guys or however many. So, It obviously depends on the trade package. But I totally agree. I would take Tyler Warren and be happy with it. I just don't think that they will.
I totally get it. Totally get that. Ev, what you got for the Commanders?
Yeah, I think the Commanders are in a good spot. They did a good job of filling needs in free agency to where they can like loosely go best available, right? Obviously, I think that the top area where need meets talent is obviously edge here. So my most likely outcome would be for them to take one of these edges, whoever on the board. Obviously, there's a lot of question on who's going where in this draft. There's a lot of uncertainty, but I think most likely I'm going to try and not butcher his name, but Donovan Ezaraku out of Boston College, good leader, good pass rusher, I think would be my likely guess. But like if Mike Green falls, Shamar Stewart, like whoever's there, James Pierce could be there. So I think that's most likely. Number two, sneaky, and a position we haven't talked about on this pod. It's not necessarily an area of need, but there's a lot of running back buzz for the Commanders. Maybe less so round one, but maybe round two. But like if Omarion Hampton falls, which I don't think is likely, but he could be in play there, or in round two, Trayvon Henderson, although he's even getting first round buzz. And I think I saw something today where he's kind of leaking into that first round, and if that's the case, that could mean Commanders. So I think that'll be interesting. And then third could be corner. There could be some corners in play there. Max Harrison, if he's still on the board, out of Kentucky, is one name. So those are the three positions I'm looking at. There is a linebacker I saw mentioned today out of UCLA. I don't know too much about him, but more of like a second round prospect that's maybe leaking into the first round that they could like, as more of like a Bobby Wagner replacement next year. But I think edge is most likely could see a surprise running back in some respects, but I think their dream is to get like Ezaraku, and then although it seems like there's no shot of getting Henderson anymore with our second round pick, but so that's kind of how I see it playing out.
You did mention Shamar Stewart. Yeah, I really, really like him. I could even see the Falcons trading back just a couple of picks. Maybe we get like a third or a fourth rounder, and then we try to go ahead and get Shamar. But realistically, I don't think that's going to happen because of what Evan mentioned. It's a very, very tight draft, and it's hard to disseminate which DNs are preferable between 15 and 25. There's that kid out of BC that you mentioned, and the kid out of Marshall and stuff like that. So who knows where they're all going to fall, but Shamar Stewart is an absolute stud. He's an SEC guy, and I think that just his talent, his experience will prove well in the NFL.
If I understand correctly, Zach, so I know initially you mentioned Jahad Campbell when you were talking about underrated players. So you're saying either Jahad Campbell or Shamar Stewart is who you'd want for the Falcons to take at 15 if they're available?
For sure. If preferably Shamar Stewart would be like a little bit later. So we would trade back a couple of picks and maybe get a third or fourth round guy out of it. But I think it's too unreliable because Shamar could also go like 17 or 18. He could also go like 30. So like, like that, there's like probably like 4 or 5 DNs that you can't really trust where they're going to go. So I would actually say my primary is Jahad Campbell. And then if he's not available, look at a potential corner. There's a couple safeties as well. But yeah, I mean, Shamar he would be a little bit of a stretch at 15, I will say.
I think it might be a bit high for him personally. Edges are tough when you start getting into the mid to late because it can be a bit of a crapshoot. The traits are there, but it's hard to predict.
I got a question, I guess, for Zach and for everyone, but on Shamar Stewart, since you brought it up, he's one of those guys, guys on the D line that their production has not been great. They lack a lot of production, and for his entire career, he's never had more than a sack and a half for a season. So obviously, he's playing against really good competition. But how much do you guys look at that as far as obviously you look at the measurables and you look at the athleticism and see kind of project on where they can be on the next level. But when you're dealing with a guy that you're going to take in the top 20, 25 picks that's never had even 2 sacks in the season, does that worry you? Like, how much do you take that into account?
That worries me completely. I didn't know that stat. Now I do not want him.
It's definitely a concern for me.
You just rock Zach's world.
Dude, I do not want him at all. He's getting kicked to the third round now.
I think Connor, specifically for edge rusher, that is a point of concern for me because grading edge rushers is so difficult. And how many truly elite or standout edge rushers come out of a draft, if you think about it? Like, every year you maybe see one or two that you talk about in future years, and then a lot of them end up being potentially good like rotation players, but not guys that you're hype about, right? Whereas I think like there's other positions where you have a better shot of getting a true game changer at that position with that pick, right? So that's why I get a little bit nervous if like, let's say like you have a high end corner, a high end, tight end. I feel like that's a bit easier to scout. I think defensive end edge rusher is one of the hardest positions to scout outside of that like number one guy like Abdul Carter, like we talked about. Um, you know, I can't even think of the last time an edge rusher went in like the late first round or second round and ended up being like a dominant talent. Like I can't even remember that.
Yeah, I mean, and I kind of go back to a couple years ago with Aiden Hutchinson and Trayvon Walker, where Walker goes number one overall when Hutchinson was thought to be the consensus pick before that. He had all the production, and he's a solid NFL. I mean, he's got room to grow too. I think he'll be a really good NFL player, like in his own kind of account. But Aiden Hutchinson, he's already, and from day one, he was a dominant D end. And I think a lot of times people, put a little bit too much emphasis on measurables and elite traits rather than looking at production, especially kids that came from big schools like Hutchinson did at Michigan. So
yeah, and those guys are top three players. I was thinking of like, and this might be for character issues or whatever, but Micah Parsons, I remember when he was in the draft, I was like salivating. I was like, I want the Colts to get him so badly because his college production was insane. Like, and I get that he wasn't some big strong guy as an edge rusher, but you just saw on tape like how ridiculous he was. And I was like, how is he dropping to where he's dropping? The Cowboys got an absolute I was so upset. I wanted him so badly. Like that's your perfect example of someone you just sleeping on for no reason. So that's production. That's not measurables. You know what I mean? I agree with you.
Yeah, I completely agree with you guys. The one caveat I'll make is, some guys can be so dominant and depending on their situation that they're just drawing like double, even triple teams, and the way the offenses are scheming them, that there's just like no way for them to get home. So, some guys maybe have that case where they're just opening up the sacks for other guys on the defense. I'm not saying that's the case here, but that would be the one caveat I make, that sometimes we do see that. But yeah, I completely agree with you.
I 100%
I want to see a
agree
guy
with that.
produce.
Yeah. Maybe I can maybe that's a good way to like lead into my Colts because we actually picked an edge rusher, which was the first draft pick on the defense last year at pick 15, which was insane. Like I don't think I've ever seen that ever. Like a top we went 14 picks before the 15th pick was a defense player and Latu Latu. This year I think we're going to be offensive minded. So I'm going to wrap it up with my Colts. I believe in my ideal world, we need to go tight end. Like that is the only position I want in the first round. If it was up to me, um, I would literally cry if Tyler Warren gets picked. I'm not even kidding. Like I want this man to be a Colt so
He'll
badly.
sob. He'll sob.
I know I will sob. Like I grew up with Dallas Clark and Peyton Manning together. I want to see another Dallas Clark type player. A guy who wears no gloves in the freezing cold catching passes. I want that type of player, and that's what Tyler Warren is. Not just as a receiving tight end, but as a blocking tight end. Like the way he'll open up the run game for Jonathan Taylor, who's objectively still an amazing running back, and we have a good offensive line. You give him Tyler Warren, oh my gosh. And then whether it's Anthony Richardson, who I really hope it's Anthony Richardson, because if he loses the starting job to Daniel Jones, we have way more problems than who we draft. But no matter who it is at quarterback, a guy like Warren is a perfect safety net for any quarterback. That's the issue we've had for years. We haven't prioritized receiving at tight end. We've only cared about blocking, and it hasn't given us a lot of middle of the field players outside of Josh Downs for our quarterbacks to get easy like first downs and safety blanket kind of passes to. So I want Tyler Warren, but I don't think we're getting him unless we trade up. So I hope we trade up. As a matter of fact, I think the Panthers are a perfect fit. But if not, Zach mentioned this guy as an overrated player earlier, and I saw Evan nodding his head yes. I completely disagree with you guys about Colston Loveland. I think he's not going to be a great blocker, but we have enough blocking tight ends, so I'm not worried about that. And we run two tight end sets a lot with Shane Steichen. I would love Colston Loveland as a receiving tight end. He's tall, he's fast, and he can catch the ball over the middle of the field, and he can attack deep down the field with two quarterbacks that can launch the ball down the middle of the field. I would love Loveland at pick 14. I think that would actually be a great spot to get him. So those are the two guys I want. If we don't go tight end, I think it's going to be one of the offensive tackles that are available. Someone like a Kevin Banks or like a Campbell would be a great pick. They're both going to be starting tackles for, I'm sure, the next like decade, and they'll be very good. So I think with some of our offensive linemen getting older in like future years, it's good to stock up. So I'll leave it at that.
Cy, what about this? You find a way to get Tyler Warren this year as your Dallas Clark, and then you guys are horrendous this year because of Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, and then next year you get Arch Manning.
Dude, that'd be crazy.
Okay, here's the problem with this. Here's the problem with this take. I obviously would, Peyton to Arch, it would be like writing a book that you couldn't even imagine, right? Like obviously I would love that, but that's me actively rooting against the guy I objectively love. So I'm not going to root for that. I would love to get Tyler Warren, but I still want AR to be good. And so we'll see what happens.
If you think that Cy's gonna sob with Tyler Warren, just imagine if all of everything that Evan just mentioned comes into fruition.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to be thinking that far ahead. If we somehow are in a position to make that pick, it's going to be a pretty brutal season for us. So we'll see what happens.
Connor, what do you think about Loveland? Are you for him? Because I think Evan and I are kind of against him and Cy's for him. What's your thoughts?
I mean, I think he's a good player. I'm probably more on Cy's side as far as that goes. But I guess my question is, if you guys draft him at, where are you guys at, 14, 15? So, 14, and he ends up being like a TJ Hawkinson type of player where, he's got receiving upside. He doesn't do a lot else other than that. Would that still be worth the pick?
I think it would be given our current needs. Defensively, we did a lot in free agency to address that position. We're very deep at the edge position because we drafted a bunch in the last couple of years. With secondary wise, we put all our money into Bynum and into Ward as our secondary. So we addressed all our defensive needs. Maybe we could use a linebacker, but I think the biggest point of like contention that we have this year, it's not best available player, it's getting a tight end, because we haven't had a decent tight end in like 5+ years, and that's been a really big issue for our quarterbacks. You can't be a young quarterback and expect to be successful if you can't throw the ball down the middle of the field, and we just haven't had that ability to. And I actually think Loveland is a bit of a better blocker than people give him credit for. The problem is when you're the second projected tight end, you're going to get compared to the first one, and Warren is like on a different planet in terms of blocking. So that's where I don't think he gets enough credit. If you look at a lot of people's big boards, though, Colston Loveland is like the number 10, number 11 player on a lot of people's big boards. That's including like all the players. I'm talking an overall player. Like he's projected to be a very high upside receiver. And in a year where wide receiver doesn't have that much upside talent, give me a great tight end. We could get a Detroit Lions situation with their draft pick, like Laporta, So I would love that.
Sweet. Is that all we got,
Yeah.
Zach? What else do you have on the agenda?
All right, fellas. Well, I know we're hitting the top of the hour here. We've been going back and forth, circling the rounds. We've analyzed probably like 25 players, so mission success.
I'm impressed.
But before we adjourn here, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in a week and a half. We're going down to Daytona, which is close to Jacksonville, so I'm sure Liam Cohen will give us a nice little Duval.
Yes, sir. They got some picks. I want to give a quick shout out to our guest Connor, man. You knew your stuff. You came in knowing your stuff. We appreciate that big time. That you did not waste any time with that. I like that.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. And the bar was set super low by my friends that came on before, Shiv and Joe. So I knew it would be better than that.
I like that.
No, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to have you on once football gets back going this year and do a little weekly. Yeah. All right, Zach, close us out.
Well, it's funny. Connor, Shiv, and Joe will give each other they'll give each other shit for like what they say on the podcast. So like Joe got a lot of critique from Connor and Shiv because he said something equivalent to like, yeah, Tom Brady's a really good player, and it's like, wow, riveting, Joe. That was riveting analysis. Well, you needed to hear more of that. But tell me more about how Tom Brady is a great player. So they always like, give each other crap on the side. So it's been about time we got Connor on, and obviously we'll have him on as a recurring guest too once we start football. All right, Mondays Down South. Thank you guys for listening.